Welcome to the Cool Tools Show. I'm Mark Frauenfelder, Editor-in-Chief of Cool Tools, a website of tool recommendations written by our readers. You can find us at cool-tools.org. I'm joined by my co-host, Kevin Kelly, founder of Cool Tools. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, it's great to be here.
In each episode of the Cool Tools Show, Kevin and I talk to a guest about some of his or her favorite uncommon and uncommonly good tools they think others should know about. Our guest this week is D.L. Cade. D.L. is an art, science, and technology writer and the former editor-in-chief of the photography blog Petapixel. When he's not writing, he works in the Knights Lab at the University of Washington, studying color vision. Hey, D.L., how's it going?
Great. How are you doing, Mark? It's nice to be on.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's really nice to meet you. I've been a reader of you for a very long time because Petapixels is one of my daily go-to sites, in part because photography has been a big part of my life for many, many, many years, and you guys do a great job. Petapixel was one of my recommended places that I suggest people go to if they want to keep up with photography, and you guys have been doing a great job.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's always weird to hear. I mean, even 8 years in, it's always weird to hear that people that I know and admire actually read what I write. You know, in the end, it still feels like some small blog to me.
Well, it is some small blog, but it's a really, really good small blog. So
Yeah.
that's what to me, it's one of the great things of the internet is that you can have these little corners where there's excellence and a bunch of people who appreciate it. So you're doing a good job.
Well, thank you.
So tell us about your choices here. So some cool tools. Broadly speaking, anything that's handy, tell us what's first on your list.
Oh, man. Well, I went a little bit all over the place. I mean, obviously, as you can tell from the varied career path, I kind of straddle two worlds here. I've been a writer for 8 years. My degree is in biomedical sciences. I briefly attended medical school and then dropped out, much to my parents' chagrin. But and then now I'm intending to get my PhD in neuroscience, which is why I'm working in the Knights Lab. But I tried to kind of run the gamut, and the first thing that I had listed was just probably one of my favorite book of all time. It's a book of essays called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten by Robert Fulghum. And you guys have probably heard of that story. The actual essay used to go around
Right.
on
Xerox.
email blast.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know about this story.
Oh man, they turned it into posters. He used to come home with kids from kindergarten.
He was actually I believe he might have been a pastor. He was a pastor, and he would write his sermons, and then he was sharing his sermons, and they were being passed around as kind of like samizdat, as kind of underground copies, and a book agent somewhere encountered a kind of like a stapled together stack of these and said, "These are fantastic. Where'd they come from?" And it was this guy up in, I don't know, Washington somewhere who was a nobody at the time.
Yeah. At the time, he actually was living in Seattle. I think he lives in like Arizona or Utah or something now. But he, I stumbled across this book actually on an ex-girlfriend's bookshelf. She had a first edition of it, and I just would pick it up when there was a spare moment and read one of the essays. And it's just this really, he has this ability, like some of the best essayists and columnists do, of just capturing something that seems really banal and simple and everyday life stuff and making it seem so extraordinary and kind of bringing you back into appreciating everyday life, which has been more important than ever this year, I feel like.
Yeah. I haven't read it in a long time, but you've just reminded me I should check it out. He was actually a fan of Whole Earth, and
Cool.
I had a chance to actually meet him.
Oh, wow.
Briefly. There was a little hiccup in the story, but that's neither here nor there. And I think he moved to like Moab or somewhere in Utah, and but he was, as you might expect, the person of of that author of those ones. He was a very kind of gentle, direct, pastoral kind of a person who was a great listener.
Yeah, I mean, you get that sense from him that he could just observe the world and capture it in such a, you know, beautiful and simple terms. I mean, it's not a difficult read, but I give this book away more than anything. Whenever I pass by a used bookstore, I go in and try and find the first edition. And so I've owned like 7 first editions of this book, and I have they released like a 15th and a 25th anniversary edition. I
Okay.
think right
And
now I've got a 25th anniversary edition and a first edition sitting on my shelf, just waiting
let's
for
see.
an
And
opportunity.
are there much differences between the editions? Is there any reason to get a first edition?
I prefer the first edition. There are
Because why?
well, so he did add a couple of essays to at least the 25th. I'm not 100% sure if they added any to the 15th, and I don't have one to check right now. They added a couple of little essays, and then I think, you know, the copy editors had another go at it. He corrected a couple of things, but maybe it's just my nostalgia. I got attached to the imperfections in the original essays, and it just felt like somebody sat down at, you know, a keyboard or a typewriter or wherever he wrote his stories and just, you know, described what, you know, some story from his life. And it's funny how the themes come back around, and it feels very timeless. So I always try to encourage people to get a first edition, but that might just be my nostalgia talking.
And you find it useful, and you go back to it. And what do you get from rereading it these days?
I mean, it depends on, he has it sort of broken down into a couple of different sections. There's, you know, some on relationships. There's some that's just general life stuff. There's holiday stuff, but, you know, broadly speaking, it's just a reminder to sort of stop and smell the roses, or appreciate life as it's coming, or, you know, also on this year in particular, it's been that sense that, you know, it's all happened before and it'll probably all happen again. You know, the hard times are not unique to right now. You know, what we're going through right now certainly feels unprecedented, and that word has been so overused. But I think it's really just comforting. It's comforting. It reconnects me to my own humanity, to other people's humanity. It has this ability to sort of take you out of your shoes and put you in someone else's. It's empathy in a book
Okay,
of essays.
there you go. That's a great summary. Book of empathy booster.
Yeah.
That
So
sounds
so
good. I've heard of
yeah.
it, but I've never read it before. But now that you recommend it, I feel like I want to read it now.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, you can find several of the essays online. I mean, the all I need to know I learned in kindergarten. That one is so popular. Like I said, I remember having a poster that had sort of the basic list from the essay. Like as a kid, I had the poster in my room. It's so weird to think about. I mean, that was when I was in, I think, like middle school.
Well, you and he go way back then.
Yeah, I connected, and I feel bad. I've never picked up any one of his other books. I mean, he's made plenty of money off me. I've bought like 10 copies of this one book, but
Well, he probably doesn't make any money from those unless if they're used copies.
that's a good point. I'm a terrible person.
No, no,
Yeah,
no, no, no. I'm just saying, so you spread the wealth around.
that's true.
Um,
I need to go. I need to go to his website, see if I can order
I
it
wonder if
straight
he's
from him.
still how he's doing, whether he's still going, and
I checked in with his website. I don't know, like I check in with him every little while. He's one of those people that I would love to meet.
yeah,
You know, one of
well,
those writers I'd love to meet before it's too late. You know, I felt
yeah,
that way about Oliver Sacks, and then he passed away.
yeah,
Who's an amazing neuroscientist and writer and
yeah. He was amazing
neurologist.
in many levels.
Oh man.
So, Dale, tell us about your second uh, tool choice here. What's another thing that you're really want to recommend?
So this is a little bit more on the creative side. Like as you know, I was the editor in chief of Petapixel for a while, so wrote for photographers and creatives, and you know, consider myself a creative for better or worse as well. And one of the things that I stumbled across as while doing reviews and covering gear was actually two companies called XP Pen and Huion that originally started out as sort of knockoffs of Wacom products. I don't know.
And for the listeners out there, a Wacom tablet is like a little small, maybe the size of it can be different sizes, like a book. It's flat. It's a tablet that has a corresponding pen that you draw on. So it's not a screen, but it's a little work surface that you can draw on that transfers the drawing to your computer in some ways, and that's what a Wacom tablet is.
So you use the pen as your mouse essentially, and the pen has some crazy number of levels of sensitivity. It's like 8,023, which I have no idea how they ended up on that exact number, but and you have like you were saying, there's several different sizes, and they have pen tablets, which is what you described, which is just a work surface that's meant to interact with the pen and potentially with your hands as well. And then there are pen displays as well, which is essentially just a little mini secondary monitor that is meant to interact with that same pen.
And in some ways, iPads these days also perform the same function, because you can get a stylus for an iPad and you can draw on the iPad in the same way. So there's a little bit of an overlap.
Oh yeah, there is for sure, and it kind of has to be mentioned now in every review of a Wacom product or one of these products that you also, if you happen to have an iPad around, give Sidecar a try. Or there's AstroPad and a couple of other apps and dongles and ways to connect an iPad and have it serve as a secondary display with that same input.
But so is that what Sidecar is? Sidecar is an app that will take your iPad and use and connect it to your computer. Is that the idea?
So Sidecar is actually built into Apple's ecosystem now. It was an update that Apple pushed themselves, and it's you have to have a slightly newer computer. It has to be one of the ones that I think has Touch ID, because the security chip that's built in has something to do with it. But if you have one of the slightly newer laptops, like the ones with the touch bar, and you have almost any iPad that's Apple Pencil enabled, you can activate Sidecar and it will turn your iPad into a secondary display, either over Bluetooth or over USB, to be able to draw directly in it as a secondary display. So that's actually a completely free thing if you already own an iPad. There are a couple of apps and hardware solutions as well that do the same thing and purport to have more features or less latency or various odds and ends, but they've been kind of in trouble since Apple installed Sidecar.
I see. So tell us about XPen and where that fits into this ecosystem.
So XP Pen and Huion are, like I said, they started out life as sort of crappy Wacom knockoffs. For the longest time, they had their styluses used batteries. Wacom's famously don't, and they were unreliable, or they had issues with software. And then over the last probably 5 years, they've just been releasing products that are, essentially on a feature level, just as good, just as functional as anything that I've ever reviewed or tried from Wacom, but at a third the price or less for most of it. And so it used to be that you would have to spend $250 to get a really good pro quality pen tablet from Wacom, and still now an Intuos Pro costs, I think, between $200 and $400 depending on the size, and you can get similar functionality for as little as $60 with some of these XP Pen and Huion tablets.
That's crazy.
And so the XP Pen and the Wacom tablets, they're two separate companies. One makes a pen and one makes a tablet. There isn't the same kind of thing with Wacom where they make the pair together.
Oh no, they're both full featured companies. So you can buy XP Pen tablets that come with the displays, or you can buy Huion tablets. I mentioned them both because they're really hard to distinguish from one another, to be honest. You can, if you read reviews or if you actually, try them out, they've all reached a level of feature parity where it really comes down to like, well, whose software do you like better? And, whose pen feel do you like better? But they all perform the same function and do it exceptionally well. And it's really lowered the barrier to entry for artists and photographers who want to get into digital art or take photo editing past the mouse.
So I'm a very kind of occasional user of the Wacom tablet, and I used to have a very large one, and I was and I didn't use it very much. I was persuaded by Scott McCloud, the cartoonist guy, to get a really smaller one,
Mhm.
because he said that's all he used to do. He worked on it every day, all day. And that was a real game changer for me, was actually to going with a small one, because I turned out that I could do all I need to do on a really small size one. Have you found that as well, or do you prefer a larger scale one?
So it's interesting I have dabbled a little bit in digital art and trying to learn how to sketch and draw and paint on within Photoshop and Illustrator, and for those purposes I like a big surface, because you need to be able to when you draw, if you want to draw a straight line, you should really be drawing from your shoulder, not from your wrist. But when it comes to photo editing, I completely agree. I think you can get one of the smallest sizes and just make sure it's got the pressure sensitivity and the features that you want. But it's nice because A, it's cheaper, and B, you can just toss it in any bag and take it with you and have it everywhere. I mean, there is something really nice about working on one of the big displays. Actually, I recently reviewed one of it was XP Pen's like 27 or 24-inch pen displays. It was a 2K quad HD resolution display with this pen functionality. And there's something incredibly engrossing about editing a photo or doing a drawing directly on the screen you're working on, and really not having to pull yourself out of that experience or even use a keyboard at all, because they've got enough little express keys and things that you just kind of get really engrossed in the whole experience. But for most photo editing tasks especially, I completely agree. I think a small little portable pen tablet is more than good enough for 99.9% of things you have to do.
And the X Pen and Huon would make one of those small tablets
They
as well.
do. They actually have a broader range, as most sort of third-party companies. They throw more products at the wall than the big established OEMs, and so they have a ton of different size variations and levels and price points that you can choose from. And I coming up on the holidays, I keep thinking about what I want to buy for some of my close friends who are into photography, and it's one of the biggest things you can do for yourself to make photo editing more sort of fun and enjoyable is to have one of these tablets. But it's nice to be able to only spend like $60 and get something solid.
I see that Amazon has like an XP Pen and tablet, 6 by 4 inches, which is what we were kind of a small one talking about, for $40.
Yep.
So that's a great price.
Yeah, it's really wild that and it used to be that the price sort of indicated that it was a subpar product, but over the last few years they've really just gotten to the point where it's just as good, and it's really hard to recommend. There are reasons, obviously, usually to go with the big brand names. Your customer support is usually going to be a little bit more robust, but in the end, it's for what you're doing. I can buy like 5 of these for what I'm going to pay for a Wacom tablet and break 5 of them by the time I need to buy another one.
And this one also has your 8,000 levels of pressure.
Yep.
8,192. So I don't know where
That's the number, and you'll see that everywhere. And I do not know how they got there. I'm sure there's a mathematical reason somewhere.
Okay, so that's a great second choice. Give us another tool that you're enamored of.
So this is a recent one for me, and I know you guys have had several people on who love Scrivener.
Yeah, I'm a Scrivener fan too.
Yeah, big Scrivener nerds, and I'm not. I've never actually used Scrivener, but it seems almost too feature rich for me. I'm just I'm this lowly blogger. I usually just get on and write 1 or 2 drafts. I don't I,
Yeah, it's good for long form when you're writing a book that has
mhm.
8,000 pages or 8,000 parts. Yeah.
But-
So
yeah.
what's your suggestion is um, tell us about your suggestion.
So my suggestion is an app called IA Writer, and it's similar to sort of like Scrivener or Drafts, or there's a few different options out there that a lot of people like to try out. But the idea is that it's a writing application that's made specifically for writers, meant to help you focus on what it is you're writing, and then it gives you a few output options and export options, and that are really, really useful for me. So it functions as ideally as a markdown writer and editor. So you write in this format called Markdown that can export to HTML or export to PDF really easily, and you use various combinations of hashtag or # depending on how old you are, what you call it, and asterisks to do things like italicize and create headings, and it has various focus modes that let you focus in on individual sentences or individual
I'm not
paragraphs.
sure what focus mode means. What do you mean you focus on
So as you're writing, you can turn it on to two different what they call focus modes, where it will sort of dim and fade into the background everything that isn't selected to be focused. So you can turn it on to a sentence level focus or a paragraph level focus, and the only thing that is sort of bright and in your face and that you can read well is the sentence or the paragraph you happen to be working on. Huh. So for shorter form work, that comes in really handy because you can easily keep getting distracted and running back and changing things, and really keeps you focused on what you're writing. But what I appreciated most about it, for me personally, almost everything that I do or that I've done over the last 8 years has been published through either Medium or WordPress. And they have built-in functionality, at least on the iOS version, or on the Mac OS version, where you can connect directly into your WordPress account or your Medium account, and you can export drafts. You can write drafts in that markdown style, and you can export drafts directly into both of those services. And so it just creates this seamless writing workflow for me, which is why I was never a fan of any other kind of writing tool. Writing in Word, writing in a plain text document, writing in anything, always ended up needing to copy and paste and mess with formatting later and do all of this stuff.
So is it how collaborative is there a cloud version of it? Because that's, I mean, most, or not most, but a lot of orgs I know that they're in the publishing or using cloud-based documents in some ways because you want an editor working on the same one, maybe at the, instead of having to make copies of things, you're working on the original. Do they have collaborative tools?
No, so that's one of the things that sort of IA Writer is kind of dinged on anytime you read like reviews of the various types, is that there's no collaboration aspect. It's really just a pared down sort of word processor and editor for individual writers, and more so targeted, I guess, towards essayists and bloggers, which is why it really appeals to me. And nothing nothing that I write ends up getting seen by an editor or by another editor until it's been submitted or put into one of these platforms that I'm already exporting.
Really? You guys really put up you didn't have an editorial pass?
No, when I was
Wow, that's very
writing,
impressive. You've
everything
just
that gets
elevated
written.
2 notches in my, because that's amazing that, wow,
Exactly, yeah.
okay.
So, I'm the writer, I'm the copy editor, and I'm the proofreader before something gets published. So for me, it's more important that I have the writing environment that's really useful for
Right,
myself.
sure, that makes sense. And iWriter, and that works, it works on the Mac and Windows and the iOS, or what?
Yeah, so the reason I went with IA Writer, I was considering a couple of different options, IA Writer and Drafts being the two big ones, primarily because of their ability to sort of export HTML and get everything out. And I ended up going with IA Writer because they have a Mac OS version, a Windows version, an iOS version, and an Android version. And with the reviews I do, right now I have 2 Apple laptops and a Windows laptop that I'm currently using, alternating between. And I really need to be able to access my writing on every platform.
Now, what's this thing with the color syntax thing? I'm seeing something that said it can like identify verbs and adjectives and stuff like that. Do you use that?
So I've not dived into that that so much. One of the things, I mean, there's a couple of things that I've started to play around with. Like the Windows version has a couple of features that the Mac OS version doesn't, and the Mac OS version has a couple of features the Windows version doesn't. But like on the Windows side, you can set writing goals. You can look different things up. There's a bunch of different features that are built into the Windows side that aren't built into the Mac side. And then on the Mac side, you can do the exporting to Medium or exporting to WordPress that I've found really handy. But I haven't actually used the feature that you're describing.
Okay, it sounds interesting. It's like it will help you sharpen your writing if you're like using too many verbs or adjectives or something. It helps you identify them.
Yeah, and I know Scrivener has something like that, I think, as well, like repeated words that you're using a lot, which that over time, I mean, when I started, and for the vast majority of my career, I've always written inside the CMS, which when I say that to another blogger, they usually cringe. I would just open up WordPress, and that's where my drafts lived.
I identify with that. I can identify with that.
That's how I do it on Boing Boing. I just use the CMS.
It's funny, but like you say that, and like there are people who will call you a heathen for doing that kind of thing. I mean, how dare you?
That's so funny.
But this changed things.
And so with IA, are you still writing? Would you still write in the CMS, or would you write in IA now? Has that changed?
Yeah, I do my final edit pass in the CMS, but I will write my draft and do my first few edits within. I do all my major editing and all my major drafting within IA Writer, and then I'll export to WordPress thinking that's my final draft. But sort of like any creative, it ends up being final, and then final, and then final actually final, and then
Right.
So I end up doing a couple more editing passes within the CMS as well. Just, I guess, old habits die hard.
Okay. So, Dio, tell us about your fourth cool tool.
Okay, so this one, I think I'd mentioned it to you over email, Kevin, and I wasn't even sure if it was a good pick. I'm starting in the neuroscience lab. It's been really amazing because suddenly I have access to it. I'm working with all of these things, all these tools that you just absolutely cannot possibly afford as an individual in the real world. Various electron microscopes and different things, but we actually also have a really incredible adaptive optics system that is essentially entirely custom built. There is no other one in the world like it. So there's a few things like that we work with, but the fourth tool that I picked is actually a Leica Confocal microscope, and I think it's the last generation. It's the SP8, and they've released a new version of it.
What does confocal microscope mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, a confocal laser scanning microscope, which is the standard type. There's a few different types, but your typical confocal microscope, the idea is that it does sort of two things. The confocal part is that it is instead of a regular light microscope will show you as far as the light can penetrate into a piece of tissue, something that you're looking at. Whereas a confocal uses this tiny pinhole that you can actually adjust to basically throw out all of the information that isn't in focus. And so it allows you to do almost like what a CT scan does, where you can take slices of, you can move through the Z plane, you can move through 3 dimensions and look just at that one plane of tissue, even in an incredibly thin piece of tissue. And you can move through these planes and you can capture images and then reconstruct it. And so by doing that, it increases your contrast a lot. For most tissue is see-through. And then the other thing that most confocals, the laser scanning part of confocal laser scanning microscope, the other thing that they do is they'll come equipped with any number of different laser options that will scan across the tissue and activate or stimulate any kind of fluorophore or thing that you stain the tissue with, that will glow as an after effect of being hit by this laser. And so it'll do this laser pass and then immediately do a pass with the camera to capture what's glowing. And so what's really cool about these, not only is it just incredible technology because you've got like 8 lasers at your disposal and you can tag your tissue with 4 or 5 different fluorophores, and then you can go through and stimulate the tissue and pull out all of these different individual bits that are being activated, and they all come out different colors and you can stack them together. And the results are just otherworldly. So for example, we work with a lot of retina. Obviously we do we're doing vision sciences. And so you can have a piece of retina that has some neurons that are filled, and then you use a special stain to just tag the nucleus of various of every cell in there. And then you can add another stain that just tags your blue sensing cone photoreceptors. And then you put this tissue underneath the confocal and you run 3 different lasers on it that will stimulate these 3 different tags and capture each of these as a different color that you can then stack on top of each other.
So the way the confocal works is it's kind of like a depth of field in photography, which is a very shallow depth of field, right? Because the other layers of depth are being ignored, and you're just and then you're focus stacking those images that are in focus. But you also have this additional thing of you have a laser which is stimulating these fluorescent compounds, but that's kind of separate from the confab itself, right?
Yeah, that's the two sort of go hand in hand and have always kind of gone hand in hand. But yeah, those are the 2 major functions of it. And so yeah, the stacking, the focus stacking happens after the fact, but as you're going through, the nice thing is that you can look at just one layer and move through just that one layer without any of the other stuff getting in the way. And then you can look at the next little layer down and the next little layer down.
So if you were using a microscope for other reasons other than looking at tissues, would a confocal microscope be useful?
It's primarily a biological sciences thing because, most, the sort of traditional original function, I think, of a confocal was to increase contrast. And so when you're looking through unstained tissues, under a regular light microscope, everything is just clear with a, little gray boundaries, and you're trying to make out the contrast there because you're basically getting everything's being flooded with light. Whereas the confocal allowed you to just look at one slice and have that slice be very high contrast. And then you add in these laser mechanisms, and it's just really cool to be able to pull out only one specific bit of the thing you're looking at. But it's not, at least I don't know of a lot of uses for it outside of the biological sciences.
And what kind of magnifications are you talking about?
Well, so you have your 10x air optic that we sort of start with, and by air optic it just means that there's only air between the front element of the lens and the tissue. But then you quickly move beyond that. So we have our next is a 20x optic, and that's an oil optic. So you have to put a drop of oil on the slide, and then the front element actually makes contact with the oil droplet, and that creates a connection that allows it to get that magnification and have it be sharp.
Mm-hmm. But 10x and 20x, those aren't really super high levels of magnification. In fact, I have a 10x triple magnifier in my hand right here. So those aren't really super high. Is that right?
Yeah, no, they're not anything crazy. So the highest we go is, I think we have a 63x optic that's also an oil, and then there's a 40x water optic. but it's not the idea of a confocal, unlike an electron microscope, which can get to just unbelievable magnifications that are sort of not reachable by standard light microscopy. The idea is more about how the confocal captures that light and what it can do, as opposed to getting closer to the tissue that you're looking at.
Okay. So Leica makes these, the one that you're talking about, is there a particular model that you're talking about? Just if somebody out there wanted to have one of these in their lab, what would they do?
Well, so Leica, the current version, I think, of the Leica is just called the Stellina, which is the newer version of what we're using. We use the Leica TCS SP8, and it's they're not cheap. I think they start around 200 grand. And then from that point on, you have to start adding things. So you can add different photo detectors. So ours, you can add a plethora of lasers and all sorts of things. So I think ours works with 5 different lasers that we can use to stimulate the tissue, and then we have 5 different detectors, so 3 photomultiplier tubes and 2 high D detectors, which I think are just CMOS sensors, uh, with various sensitivities and things that you can use so that you can capture multiple layers at the same time. Essentially, it works so quickly that you can scan the whole piece of tissue over and over again, stimulating it with a different laser each time.
Okay. We'll include a link to these microscopes so you can see the kind of it's a very technical kind of images rather than being pretty. They're most often, as you suggested, they have compounds injected into the tissues, and those compounds will reflect different kinds of tissue. So it's a way of kind of X-raying the tissue for the different components rather
Exactly.
than looking for something pretty. And so that's where your depth matters, because you can kind of distinguish these with different colors.
Yeah, you can distinguish individual things you're looking for, but I mean, one of the cooler aspects of it is just the colorful, the sort of is how pretty the final image can look. So, like Nikon does a small world competition every year, which is their microscopy and ultra macro competition, and every year the winner is a confocal image. Like this year was a zebrafish, and I think its skeleton was tagged with one type of fluorophore that was blue, and its lymphatic vessels were tagged with a different fluorophore that they interpreted as orange. And so you've got this sort of iridescent blue orange outline of a fish that shows where all of these vessels exist. And on the one hand, it's incredibly pretty, and on the other hand, it was actually a groundbreaking image because it proved that these vessels existed in the fish's skull that they didn't know about.
Wow. So DL, you've left Petapixel. Now you are doing your PhD, but you also have a newsletter.
Yeah. So I sort of over time have gotten a little bit burnt out on the daily news grind, and kind of decided to return to my science roots. And so I'm working in this lab on the way to get my PhD, but the writer in me will never die. And so I started a newsletter called Triple Point, which is I describe it as a weekly roundup of the most interesting stories from the intersection of art, science, and technology.
Sounds like something I would like to know about.
Yeah, that
Is
sounds really
this a
cool.
Substack newsletter, or where do we find it?
Yeah, it's a Substack newsletter. It's just triplepoint.substack.com, and I've done it's every Saturday, and I'll round up usually between 5 and 10 of the most interesting stories that week from the worlds of science, technology. Art makes its way in there as well, because I've always been torn between these two worlds, and I'd like to do my little part to break down that wall.
And is it a free newsletter right now, or do you have it paid, or how does that work?
It's a free newsletter right now. It's just a labor of love, something that I'm doing because I am really interested in this stuff, and I'd love to share it with other people who are really interested. And
How
especially
often does it
now,
come out?
once a week, every Saturday. Not at a particular time, because there are times that I've published it at 8 p.m. and times when I've published it at 10 a.m. But every Saturday I'm committed to putting this out.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. So Yeah, this sounds like a really great intersection. I don't think there's that many publications that are kind of in that trifecta, so that's really great. We'll point readers to that. And is this the best place for people to kind of follow you right now?
I mean, the newsletter is where I'm kind of producing the most work. I also I publish some personal essays on occasion through Medium, and that's just my username is just DLCade there. And then I'm trying to be a little bit more active on Twitter without losing my mind, and that's also DLCade. That's its own challenge.
Sure. Well, this has really been great. I just signed up for Triple Point, and I wish you great luck in your pursuit of a PhD in neuroscience. We need more scientists, and I'm glad you're taking the challenge. So thanks for sharing your tools on Cool Tools as well.
So
Yeah,
great chatting
thank
with you,
you.
DL.
Yeah, it was great talking to you guys too. Thank you so much for the invite. It was hard to narrow it down to 4. I'll
I
say
know it
that much.
always is.
Yeah, I'm sure for you guys more than anyone.
Hey everybody, it's Mark from the Cool Tools podcast. I want to thank you for being a listener to Cool Tools, and I also would like to let you know about our Patreon page. If you would like to support the Cool Tools show, as well as our video channel, the website, and all the newsletters that we do, you can go to patreon.com/cooltools, that's just one word, Cool Tools, and pledge any amount you want. You could even pledge $1 a month. Every little bit helps. We have editors, we pay for transcribing costs, we pay our reviewers. Every bit of money that you contribute goes towards supporting the show. I'd like to give a shout out to our supporters of the Cool Tools podcast. This week, I'd like to thank the following Patreon supporters: Bill Schuler, Bob Kay, Brian Pelly, Carl D. Patterson, Chad Cosby, Chris Wieland, Chris Weirstook, Craig Tooker, Dan O'Brien, Dean Putney, Danelle Cunningham, Evan Barker, Graham Medlin, Hans Riesbeck, Helen Hegedus, Jerry Kearns, Jim Lesko, Jim Spofford, John Pollock, John Burdenbaugh, Keith O., Ken Altman, Les Howard, Lauren Bast, Mock Nerd, Malton Make, Mark Goebel, Matt Gromes, Michael Douglas, Michael Jones, and Michael Pecorini. Thanks to all of you for supporting the Cool Tools show. We really appreciate it.